We always thought Maple Hollow was safe, a place where we knew every face, every street, every secret. But Ellie's disappearance proved we didn't know our home at all. And maybe we weren't supposed to. How does a child vanish in front of hundreds of witnesses and leave nothing behind? The answer lies buried beneath 20 years of silence, beneath the soil of a fairground where cotton candy and carousels mask something darker. What happened to 8-year-old Ellie Murrow wasn't just a tragedy. It was a warning no one heeded. I told them back then, something was buried here. Whispers Betty Hartman, longtime Maple Hollow resident, her fingers trembling as she points toward the abandoned storage trailer unearthed during fairground renovations in 2023. But nobody wanted to listen. Inside that trailer, fair equipment, boxes of old tickets, ride parts, and one object that shouldn't exist, a child's yellow sundress, identical to what Ellie wore the night she disappeared, preserved as though time never touched it. This is the story of what happens when a town chooses comfort over truth, when the places we trust most become the perfect hiding spots for monsters, when the people tasked with protecting us look away at the exact moment we need them most. Every year since 1937, the Maple Hollow County Fair had marked summer's triumphant finale. Every year except 2023, when the ground finally gave up its secrets. The sky above Maple Hollow erupted in starbursts of red and gold as the annual fireworks display began. Families sprawled on blankets across the central field, heads tilted upward in collective wonder. Teenagers clustered near the Ferris wheel, their faces illuminated in alternating flashes of neon and darkness. 8-year-old Ellie Murrow stood transfixed, her small hand wrapped around a cone of pink cotton candy. Her other hand gripped the wrist of her 16-year-old sister, Rachel. "Look!" Ellie pointed skyward as a shower of blue sparks rained down. Her yellow sundress, the one with daisies embroidered along the hem, caught the carnival lights, making her glow against the gathering dusk. Rachel Murrow didn't see the fireworks. Her attention had shifted to her vibrating phone. A text from her boyfriend, Dylan. She absently released Ellie's hand to type a response. "Just a minute, Elle," Rachel murmured, thumbs moving across the keypad. She pressed send and looked up, expecting to see her sister's freckled face turned skyward. But where Ellie had stood seconds before, there was only empty space. Rachel scanned the crowd, initially unconcerned. Ellie had a habit of darting toward whatever captured her interest. A carnival game, a food vendor, a passing friend. She'd be nearby, mesmerized by something new. "Ellie," Rachel called, rising to her tiptoes. "Ellie." Her voice disappeared into the explosion of fireworks overhead. No one turned. No one noticed. 10 minutes later, Rachel's concern became panic. She pushed through the dense crowd, asking strangers if they'd seen a little girl in a yellow dress with field daisies in her hair. Most shook their heads, eyes still fixed on the spectacular display above. "Kids wander off all the time at these things," a bored security guard assured her when she finally found someone official. "She probably got distracted by the petting zoo. We'll make an announcement." When Ellie's name echoed through the fairground loudspeakers, Rachel felt momentary relief. Surely her sister would hear it and make her way to the information booth, but no little girl in a yellow dress appeared. By 9:45 p.m., the fireworks had ended. The crowds thinned as families collected their blankets and headed toward the parking lot. The once magical atmosphere had faded, leaving only the mechanical drone of rides and the occasional burst of laughter. For Rachel, the carnival lights no longer sparkled. They cast eerie shadows between stalls, creating a labyrinth of darkness and glare. She ran between rides, her voice growing hoarse from shouting her sister's name. With each passing minute, the knot in her stomach tightened. The fair's night manager finally called the police at 10:30 p.m. By then, most of the families with children had left, unaware of the frantic search unfolding around them. Sheriff Mark Collins arrived at 10:45 p.m., his expression grave as Rachel and her parents, Lynn and Robert Murrow, described Ellie's disappearance. "She was right there," Rachel repeated, tears streaming down her face. "Right next to me during the fireworks. I only looked away for a second." That night, flashlights swept across the deserted fairgrounds. Officers moved between silent carousel horses and empty food stalls. Search dogs sniffed the area where Ellie was last seen, tracking her scent to the Ferris wheel before losing it entirely. Near the wheel's base, an officer discovered a paper bag of cotton candy, half crushed. The pink sugar melted into dirt. Ellie's fingerprints were later confirmed on the cone. By dawn, the carnival grounds had transformed from a place of joy to a crime scene. Yellow police tape cordoned off the central area. Forensic technicians in white coveralls combed through trash bins and flower beds. The morning light revealed a single hair ribbon caught under the Ferris wheel's metal base plate, identical to those Ellie had worn in her braids. "Security cameras should have caught something," Officer Nadine Morris told Sheriff Collins as they reviewed the Ferris wheel area. "There were 3 covering this section alone." But when technicians pulled the footage, they found a 31-minute gap. Between 8:07 p.m. and 8:38 p.m., the exact window when Ellie disappeared, all 3 cameras showed only static. An equipment malfunction, the fair's maintenance supervisor suggested. A power surge from the fireworks display, perhaps? No one questioned it. No one wanted to suggest the alternative, that someone had deliberately disabled those cameras. Witness statements contradicted each other. A teenager claimed to have seen Ellie walking hand in hand with a man in a blue cap near the cotton candy stand. A grandmother insisted she'd spotted the child alone by the carousel just minutes before the fireworks ended. A ride operator remembered a little girl in yellow boarding the Ferris wheel with her family, but couldn't say if it was Ellie. The Maple Hollow Record ran its headline the next day, "Child Missing from County Fair." Below it, Ellie's school portrait smiled out at readers, her freckles and gap-toothed grin a painful reminder of innocence against the stark black newsprint. The fair reopened that afternoon. The Ferris wheel continued its rotation. Cotton candy machines spun sugar into clouds. Children laughed. It would take 20 years before anyone understood what that first day had already revealed. The town of Maple Hollow had chosen comfort over truth from the very beginning. The search for Ellie Murrow expanded beyond the fairgrounds into the surrounding woods, neighborhoods, and nearby lake shores. Volunteers gathered each morning in the Maple Hollow High School parking lot, where Sheriff Collins assigned search grids and distributed flyers bearing Ellie's photograph. On the 3rd day, only half as many people showed up. By the 6th day, the volunteer force had dwindled to a handful of dedicated individuals, mostly friends of the Murrow family. While Maple Hollow residents expressed concern in grocery store aisles and church pews, they also spoke in hushed tones about the inconvenience of the investigation. The Fair Committee had voted unanimously to continue operations, citing economic necessity and community morale. "It's a tragedy, of course," said Marjorie Bell, the fair's longtime organizer, in an interview with the local paper. "But we can't let one unfortunate incident shut down a tradition that's brought joy to generations." Behind closed doors, parents reassured themselves with familiar comfort. It couldn't happen again. Lightning doesn't strike twice. We'll just keep a closer eye on our kids. These were the whispers Rachel Murrow overheard as she stood in line at the pharmacy, picking up sleeping pills for her mother, who hadn't slept since Ellie vanished. "You know what I heard?" a woman murmured to her friend, unaware that Rachel stood behind them. "The sister was texting her boyfriend when it happened. Wasn't even watching her." Rachel abandoned her place in line and fled, the words burning like acid in her chest. At home, the Murrows' neat colonial house had transformed into a strange museum of grief. Lynn Murrow sat in Ellie's room for hours, arranging and rearranging stuffed animals on her daughter's unmade bed. Robert Murrow maintained rigid normality, insisting on regular mealtimes, and speaking of Ellie in the present tense, as though she might walk through the door at any moment. Only Rachel seemed to understand the truth that no one wanted to face. Every passing hour made it less likely they would find Ellie alive. The official investigation faltered almost immediately. Key evidence was compromised within the first 48 hours. The cotton candy bag had been handled without gloves. Footprints near the Ferris wheel were obliterated when the fair reopened. Witness statements were filed, but never properly cross-referenced. "We're doing everything by the book," Sheriff Collins assured the Murrow family during their daily briefing. But archives later revealed the case file had been labeled open, non-priority, after only 10 days. The problem wasn't that they couldn't find answers, Rachel would later explain. It's that they weren't asking the right questions. Those questions might have included why security footage from that specific time frame had disappeared, or why Tom Grayson, a maintenance worker who had been reprimanded for inappropriate interactions with children 2 months earlier, wasn't interviewed until 3 weeks after Ellie's disappearance. They might have questioned why Marjorie Bell, upon learning of the missing security footage, suggested it was probably just a coincidence, rather than demanding an investigation into potential tampering. Most importantly, they might have asked why Maple Hollow seemed so determined to forget that anything had happened at all. By July 19th, 1 week after Ellie's disappearance, the search had been officially scaled back. Sheriff Collins held a press conference on the fairground steps, the Ferris wheel turning lazily behind him as he spoke of exhausting all immediate leads and transitioning to a long-term investigation. That night, Rachel watched from her bedroom window as the fair lights twinkled in the distance. The same Ferris wheel where her sister was last seen continued its endless rotation, passengers rising and falling in predictable patterns, while below them, the truth remained buried beneath bright lights and cotton candy. No one understood that they were all part of the mirage, the comforting illusion that safety was real, that evil could not exist in familiar places, that children did not simply vanish without explanation. It would take 2 decades before Rachel Murrow would understand what she was really witnessing. Not just her sister's disappearance, but an entire community's conspiracy of silence. Rachel Murrow returned to Maple Hollow on a gray March morning, driving the same roads she had traveled countless times in her recurring nightmares. At 36, her once wild curls were now cut into a practical bob, and fine lines had formed at the corners of her eyes, the permanent marks of someone who had looked too long into darkness. After graduating college, Rachel had built a life dedicated to others who shared her pain. Her work with the Families of Missing Persons Network had taken her across the country, advocating for those who, like her family, lived in the terrible limbo of not knowing. But today, she wasn't here as an advocate. She was here because of a phone call from Sheriff Ethan Price, who had replaced Collins 5 years earlier. "We found something at the fairgrounds," he'd said, his voice carefully neutral. "Something you should see." The fairgrounds had changed little in 20 years. The same arch marked the entrance, though its paint had faded. The carousel pavilion stood silent, awaiting the summer season. Construction equipment clustered near the southeast corner, where expansion had begun for the annual fair, scheduled to return in July after a 3-year pandemic hiatus. Sheriff Price met her by the parking lot, his cruiser's lights off but badge catching the weak March sunlight. "It's over here," he said, leading her toward a section of churned earth near where the Ferris wheel had once stood. Construction crew found it yesterday while digging foundation footers for the new pavilion. A rectangular object lay partially exposed in the mud, a storage trailer, its metal sides corroded but intact, the kind used for storing equipment between seasons. "It was buried?" Rachel asked, her voice distant even to her own ears. 2 feet down, deliberately buried. According to the forensic team, wouldn't have found it if not for the new construction. Workers had already removed most of the soil surrounding the trailer. Its padlocked doors faced upward, as though the container had been carefully positioned before being covered with earth. "We're waiting on a warrant before opening it," Sheriff Price explained, "but ground-penetrating radar shows it's full of objects. Likely fair equipment based on location." Rachel felt a familiar coldness spreading through her chest. She had experienced this sensation too many times over the years. The momentary hope that this lead, this clue, might finally provide answers, followed by the crushing disappointment when it led nowhere. "You could have told me this over the phone," she said. "Why did I need to see a buried storage container?" Sheriff Price hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was a mud-streaked scrap of yellow fabric. "This was caught in the trailer's exterior seam," he said quietly, "exposed when they lifted it." Rachel's hands trembled as she took the bag. Even through the plastic, she recognized the pattern. Small embroidered daisies on yellow cotton. "It's from her dress," she whispered, "the one she was wearing that night." The warrant came through by afternoon. Forensic technicians photographed the trailer's exterior before breaking the rusted padlock. The metal doors groaned as they swung upward, revealing a space untouched for 2 decades. Inside, as expected, were boxes of old fair supplies, string lights with missing bulbs, stacks of faded prize ribbons, dismantled booth signs. Along one wall stood 3 mannequin torsos once used for displaying fair t-shirts. But in the far corner, sealed in a clear plastic bag and laid flat on top of a wooden crate, was a child's sundress, yellow with daisies embroidered along the hem. Perfect, untouched by time. Rachel's knees buckled. A technician caught her arm, guiding her to sit on an overturned plastic bucket outside the trailer. "That's impossible," she said, watching as photographers documented the dress's position. That's her dress. Exactly her dress." "We'll need to confirm through testing," Sheriff Price said, though his expression suggested he already believed it. "But yes, it appears to match the description from the original reports." Later that evening, in the quiet of the sheriff's office, Rachel stared at photographs taken from every angle of the buried trailer's contents. Each item had been cataloged, removed, and placed into evidence containers. "The dress has been preserved," forensic specialist Dr. Wei Chen explained, gesturing to a chemical analysis readout. "Traces of naphthalene and paradichlorobenzene, common compounds used in archival preservation. Someone wanted to keep it intact. But why?" Rachel's voice cracked. "Why keep it at all, let alone preserve it?" "Some perpetrators keep souvenirs," Sheriff Price said carefully, "but typically not with this level of care." Dr. Chen indicated another report. "We found something else. A hair fiber on the dress collar. Preliminary DNA testing suggests it's male. Not a match to your father or any family member in the original elimination samples." "Can you identify whose it is?" "We've run it through CODIS. No matches yet, but we've expanded the search parameters." Rachel's gaze fell on a manifest that had been found inside the trailer, dated October 2004, more than a year after Ellie's disappearance. It listed the trailer's contents as decommissioned equipment and was signed by Marjorie Bell, then chair of the Fair Committee. "Did Marjorie Bell know this dress was in there?" Rachel asked. Sheriff Price shook his head. "We don't know yet. She's been notified of the discovery, but her attorney has advised her not to speak with us until tomorrow." Rachel stared at the photograph of the yellow dress, laid out on an evidence table like a small ghost. 20 years, she whispered. "It's been waiting all this time, just inches beneath where thousands of people walked every summer." What she didn't say, what she couldn't bring herself to articulate, was the implication of the dress's condition. Someone had carefully preserved her sister's clothing. Someone had deliberately sealed it away. Someone had wanted this moment to arrive. The question wasn't just who had taken Ellie anymore. It was who had wanted her memory preserved, yet hidden from the world. And why had Maple Hollow worked so hard to bury not just a storage trailer, but the truth itself? Liam Ortega's phone rang at 6:17 a.m. As a journalist for the Midwestern Investigative Coalition, early calls usually meant breaking news. But the voice on the other end wasn't a source or editor. "Liam, it's Rachel Murrow." He hadn't spoken to Rachel in years, though he'd followed her career advocating for families of missing persons. In elementary school, he and Ellie had been friends. The kind of childhood friendship based on proximity and shared lunch tables rather than deep connection. But that connection had been enough to pull him into the orbit of her disappearance, into the gravitational force of Rachel's determination to find answers. "They found something at the fairgrounds," she told him, Ellie's dress. Within hours, Liam arrived in Maple Hollow, his press credentials guaranteeing him access where others were turned away. He found Rachel at her childhood home, now occupied solely by Robert Murrow. Lynn had passed away 5 years earlier, never knowing what happened to her youngest daughter. "Dad keeps everything," Rachel explained, leading Liam to the basement where cardboard boxes lined metal shelves, including every video ever taken at the fair. Robert Murrow, now 73, nodded at Liam from his seat in the corner, surrounded by photo albums and VHS tapes. "Been going through them again," he said, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. "Thought I might have missed something." For 20 years, Robert had reviewed these tapes on each anniversary of Ellie's disappearance. Home videos taken by fairgoers, donated to the family in hopes that some background detail, some accidental frame might reveal what had happened to Ellie. "Dad digitized them all," Rachel explained, pointing to a laptop connected to an external hard drive. "Every tape, every photo." Liam spent 3 days immersed in footage of the 2003 fair. Most clips showed the expected scenes: children on rides, families eating funnel cakes, teenagers trying to win oversized stuffed animals. But in one video, taken by a parent recording their child on the carousel, he spotted something. "Look," he told Rachel, freezing the frame, "behind the white horse." There stood Ellie, her yellow dress unmistakable, daisies in her hair. And beside her, a man in a blue baseball cap was bending down, offering her what appeared to be a balloon. "This timestamp," Liam noted, pointing to the corner, 7:53 p.m., 24 minutes before she disappeared. They found the man again in another video, taken near the cotton candy stand at 8:02 p.m., the same blue cap, the same stance, and again near the exit at 8:04 p.m., moving with remarkable speed across the fairgrounds. "He's everywhere," Rachel whispered, in the background of so many shots, but no one noticed him. Sheriff Price brought in FBI analyst Dr. Vivian Noakes to review the footage. After 2 days of study, she presented her findings in the Maple Hollow Sheriff's Department conference room. "This individual appears in 17 distinct video clips," Dr. Noakes explained, displaying a fairground map with red dots indicating each sighting. "His movement pattern is inconsistent with normal fairgoer behavior. Most visitors follow predictable paths between attractions, food, and rest areas. This subject moves against traffic flow, circles back to the same locations repeatedly, and positions himself near exits and low-traffic corridors." "Predatory behavior," Sheriff Price translated. "Classic hunting pattern," Dr. Noakes confirmed. "And his timing is suspicious. He's visible throughout the footage until 8:07 p.m., exactly when the security cameras failed. He reappears at 8:40 p.m., 2 minutes after cameras resumed function, but without the blue cap and appearing to wear different clothing." Rachel leaned forward. "Do we know who he is?" No identification yet, but there's something else concerning. Dr. Noakes displayed an image of a vendor booth. This cotton candy stand appears in multiple videos. According to Fair records, it was operated by TG Concessions. However, when we cross-referenced vendor licenses, no such company existed in county records. TG? Liam repeated. Tom Grayson? Sheriff Price nodded grimly. We've been looking into that. Grayson worked maintenance for the fair from 2001 until April 2003, when he was dismissed after complaints about his behavior around children, nothing that resulted in charges, but enough to terminate his employment. But he came back, Rachel said, as a vendor. It appears so. We found an employment roster in the fair committee archives. Half the temporary hires were never properly documented. Paid in cash, no background checks, including the cotton candy vendors. That's negligent, Liam observed. That's small-town operations, Sheriff Price corrected. At least back then. Rachel turned to Dr. Noakes. Can you identify the man in the videos? Match him to Grayson? The image quality is poor, and he's deliberately keeping his face averted from cameras. But physical build and movement patterns are consistent with someone of Grayson's height and weight. Over the next 2 days, Liam and Rachel tracked down former fair employees, searching for anyone who remembered Grayson or the cotton candy vendor from 2003. Most had moved away, changed phone numbers, or simply didn't recall details from 20 years earlier. But Karen Mills, who had worked the ticket booth, remembered something unsettling. That candy man gave me the creeps, she told them, sitting in her assisted living facility room. Always watching the kids a beat too long, you know? I mentioned it to Marjorie, told her something seemed off. She said he was just socially awkward, that I shouldn't make trouble. Did you ever learn his name? Liam asked. Karen frowned. Never heard anyone call him by name? But I remember when they found him a replacement. One of the committee members, Frank Bell, I think, Marjorie's husband. He said something strange. Tom's done us enough favors. Rachel's breath caught. Tom? As in Tom Grayson? Could be. All I know is that candy man disappeared right after the little girl did. Never saw him again. Back at the sheriff's department, they discovered a receipt buried in the financial records. A payment to TG Fair Services for vendor support dated June 30th, 2003, just 2 weeks before the fair opened. The signature authorizing payment belonged to Frank Bell, treasurer of the fair committee. They hired him back, Rachel said, staring at the receipt. After dismissing him for inappropriate behavior with children, they brought him back under a different title. And no one checked, Liam added. No one verified his background. In a place filled with children, they let a known risk operate freely. Sheriff Price's phone rang, interrupting their conversation. As he listened, his expression darkened. That was the lab, he said after hanging up. The DNA from the hair fiber on Ellie's dress, it's a match to Tom Grayson's profile from his employment records. The mirage of safety had claimed its first victim 20 years ago. Now, as it dissolved, what emerged was a pattern more terrifying than anyone in Maple Hollow had been willing to acknowledge. Not just negligence, but knowing disregard for warning signs that had been there all along. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Rachel stood before the Maple Hollow Town Council, cameras from 3 news stations capturing her testimony. What had begun as a local story about a cold case breakthrough had exploded into regional headlines. Buried evidence reveals town secrets, and 20-year cover-up in Maple Hollow Fair case. For 20 years, my family has lived with unanswered questions, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. We believed Maple Hollow shared our grief, our desire for truth. What we've discovered instead is that some in this community actively worked to bury evidence, to protect reputations, rather than seek justice for an 8-year-old girl. Town Council President Gerald Winters shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Murrow, These are serious allegations without substantiation. The discovery of the storage trailer is concerning, certainly, but to suggest deliberate concealment by town officials? I have the burial manifest, Rachel interrupted, sliding a document across the table. Signed by Marjorie Bell, authorizing the trailer to be decommissioned and removed from inventory in October 2004. The earth around it shows it was deliberately buried, not simply abandoned. Councilwoman Patricia Lopez examined the manifest. This doesn't prove knowledge of what was inside. It could have been routine disposal of outdated equipment. Disposal doesn't include preserving a missing child's dress with archival chemicals, Rachel countered. Someone knew exactly what that trailer contained. Someone wanted it hidden, but preserved. As the council members exchanged glances, Liam Ortega stood from the audience. Public records show that in September 2003, 2 months after Ellie's disappearance, this council approved an emergency budget allocation of $47,000 for fairground infrastructure improvements. Yet no major improvements were documented that year. Liam placed another document on the table. This same amount was withdrawn in cash by then-Treasurer Frank Bell 3 days before the trailer was buried. The chamber fell silent. Council President Winters cleared his throat. These are historical financial matters that current members cannot speak to. Mr. Bell is deceased, as you know. And Marjorie Bell? Rachel asked. Is she also unable to explain why she signed off on burying evidence in a missing child case? Mrs. Bell has been advised by counsel not to make public statements at this time, Winters replied. I must remind everyone that these are unproven allegations. As the meeting continued, Rachel noticed a familiar face in the back row. Retired Sheriff Mark Collins, now in his 70s, watching with an unreadable expression. When the session adjourned, he disappeared before she could approach him. Later that evening, as Rachel sat reviewing documents in her father's kitchen, a knock came at the door. Sheriff Collins stood on the porch, rain dripping from his hat brim. May I come in? He asked. There are things you should know. Over coffee, Collins revealed what he had kept hidden for 2 decades. I was told to back off, he said, his weathered hands cradling the mug. 6 days after Ellie vanished, Mayor Wilson called me into his office with Frank Bell and 2 council members. They said the investigation was damaging the town's reputation and hurting business. They wanted me to scale back, to handle it quietly. And you agreed? Rachel's voice was barely audible. Collins stared into his coffee. I compromised, said I'd reduce the visible presence but continue investigating. What I didn't know then was that they'd already decided the case would never be solved. What do you mean? Evidence disappeared from the lockup? Witness statements were removed from files? The shoe prints we found behind the Ferris wheel, consistent with maintenance worker boots, vanished from evidence. He looked up, his eyes hollow with guilt. I thought it was incompetence, record-keeping errors. By the time I realized it was deliberate, years had passed. Why come forward now? Because of what they found in that trailer. Because I've lived with this for 20 years. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a yellowed envelope. This is a copy of my original case notes, things that never made it into the official file, including what we found the morning after she disappeared. Inside the envelope was a hand-drawn diagram of the fairgrounds, with detailed notes about evidence locations. A yellow highlight marked an area behind the Ferris wheel. Male boot prints, size 11, leading to maintenance shed. Similar pattern to standard-issue boots worn by fair staff. We photographed these prints, Collins continued. Took castings, but when I asked for the lab results 2 weeks later, I was told the evidence had been accidentally damaged. When I pushed, I was reminded that my retirement package depended on my cooperation with town priorities. They bought your silence, Rachel said, the realization like ice in her veins. They bought my uncertainty, Collins corrected. made me doubt what I knew, question my own judgment. By the time I retired, I'd convinced myself I was remembering things wrong. He rubbed his face wearily. I was a coward, Rachel. I'm sorry. The next morning, Rachel and Liam visited Marjorie Bell's home on Maple Lane. At 76, the former Fair Committee chair still maintained the pristine colonial, where she had lived for 40 years. Her attorney met them at the door, advising that his client would answer questions, but maintained her innocence regarding any wrongdoing. Marjorie sat in her sunroom, hands folded neatly in her lap, a delicate china teacup untouched before her. I've already spoken with Sheriff Price, she said, her voice quavering slightly. I have nothing to add. You signed the manifest for the trailer's disposal, Rachel said without preamble. The trailer containing my sister's dress? I signed many documents as committee chair. I wasn't aware of its contents. Marjorie's gaze shifted to the garden beyond the window. The fair generated tremendous paperwork. Did you know Tom Grayson returned to work the fair after being dismissed? Liam asked. Mr. Grayson's employment was terminated in April 2003. He did not return to fair employment. We have a receipt showing payment to his company, TG Fair Services, authorized by your husband. Marjorie's hand trembled, rattling the teacup in its saucer. Frank handled financial matters. I wasn't involved in vendor contracting. Mrs. Bell, Rachel leaned forward. Sheriff Collins has provided documentation showing that town officials, including your husband, deliberately impeded the investigation into my sister's disappearance. They removed evidence. They pressured law enforcement. They buried, literally buried, crucial evidence. You don't understand, Marjorie's voice dropped to a whisper. This town depends on the fair, has since 1937. When that child went missing, reservations canceled. Tourism dropped 80%. Businesses nearly closed. She finally met Rachel's gaze. We had to protect the town. At the expense of finding my sister's killer? We never believed she was killed. Children run away. They get lost. Accidents happen. But murder? In Maple Hollow? It was unthinkable. So you chose not to think it, Rachel said coldly. You chose to look away. Marjorie Bell stared out the window again, tears tracking silently down her powdered cheeks. You think you know what you want to find, she said finally. But some truths don't belong above ground. As they left, Rachel noticed something on Marjorie's mantelpiece, a photograph of the 2003 Fair Committee. 10 smiling faces posed before the Ferris wheel, and standing slightly apart at the edge of the frame was a man in a blue baseball cap. The conspiracy of silence that had protected Maple Hollow's image for 2 decades was beginning to fracture, revealing not a single villain, but an entire community that had chosen comfortable lies over unbearable truth. The spring rains came early to Maple Hollow, unusually heavy and persistent. Water pooled in low areas of the fairgrounds, turning construction sites into mud pits. Work on the new pavilion had been suspended indefinitely as the investigation expanded. On April 7th, Sheriff Price called Rachel with news. The rain exposed something else. Construction crew found another container buried near the carousel site, smaller than the trailer. We're getting a warrant to open it. By the time Rachel arrived, forensic technicians had already established a perimeter around a metal footlocker partially exposed by erosion. Unlike the trailer, this container appeared newer, its metal still retaining some shine beneath the mud. Ground-penetrating radar shows it's about 2/3 full, Sheriff Price explained. Can't tell contents yet, but it's definitely not empty. The warrant arrived by mid-afternoon. As technicians carefully opened the locked container, Rachel stood behind the police line, her father beside her, his hand gripping hers with surprising strength. Inside the footlocker, a stack of expired fair food vouchers from 2003 bound with a rubber band, a tarnished whistle on a frayed lanyard, a ring of keys labeled Maintenance Number 3, and at the bottom, protected by a plastic sleeve, a photograph. The image showed two girls at a fair photo booth, Rachel and Ellie Murrow, making silly faces for the camera. The corner of the photograph was singed, as though someone had tried to burn it, then changed their mind. "That's from that night," Robert Murrow whispered, his voice breaking. "We stopped at the photo booth right when we arrived. Ellie wanted to remember her perfect day." Sheriff Price gestured to a technician who carefully removed the photograph with gloved hands and placed it in an evidence bag. "There's writing on the back," the technician noted, turning it over gently. In faded blue ink, 3 words, "I'm sorry, Ellie." Rachel stared at the handwriting, a chill spreading through her despite the mild spring afternoon. "Is that—" "We'll need handwriting analysis," Sheriff Price said, "but preliminary impression suggests it matches Tom Grayson's personnel documents." The footlocker yielded further secrets. The whistle had been etched with initials, TG. The keys opened locks at the old maintenance shed, demolished in 2010 to make room for expanded parking. Most significantly, the container itself bore fingerprints matching both Tom Grayson and Frank Bell. "This suggests collaboration," FBI consultant Dr. Noakes explained that evening. "The preservation of the dress in one location, these items in another. It's a sophisticated concealment pattern for a rural community, not what we'd typically expect from a single opportunistic predator." "You're saying multiple people were involved?" Rachel asked. "The evidence increasingly points to a conspiracy of at least 2 individuals, possibly more," Dr. Noakes confirmed. "The systematic removal of evidence from the original investigation, the deliberate burial of these containers, the financial transactions surrounding the trailer disposal, these indicate organized action." Liam, who had been reviewing the fair's financial records, identified another disturbing pattern. In the 5 years following Ellie's disappearance, the fair committee made annual donations to a private security firm owned by Gerald Winters, now town council president. The company had no other clients and dissolved in 2010, right after the maintenance shed was demolished. "Money laundering?" Sheriff Price suggested. "Or payments for services rendered?" Liam replied grimly. "Winters was on the town council in 2003. He voted to approve the emergency budget allocation that funded the trailer burial. On April 12th, forensic analysis confirmed that soil samples from the footlocker matched compounds found in Tom Grayson's former residence, suggesting the container had been stored there before burial. More disturbingly, chemical preservation agents on the photograph matched those used on Ellie's dress. The same unusual combination of compounds not commercially available to the general public. "These chemicals were special ordered," Dr. Chen reported, "used by museums and archives for document preservation. In 2003, only 1 person in Maple Hollow had access to these compounds." "Who?" Rachel asked. "Martin Wiley, high school chemistry teacher and part-time fair committee member," Dr. Chen said. "He ordered them through the school for preserving historical documents in the town archive." Martin Wiley had died in 2019, taking whatever knowledge he possessed to his grave. But his role in preserving evidence of Ellie's abduction suggested a contradictory impulse among the conspirators. They had concealed the truth, yet ensured it would survive, protected from time's decay. "It's as though they wanted it found eventually," Dr. Noakes observed, "just not in their lifetimes." The soil continued to yield secrets as the rain persisted. On April 15th, a third cache emerged when a section of ground collapsed near the old carousel foundation. This time, no container protected the contents, just objects wrapped in plastic sheeting, buried in haste. Inside, a blue baseball cap, a carnival worker's vest with staff printed across the back, and a small notebook filled with childish handwriting. "It's Ellie's diary," Robert Murrow confirmed, his hands shaking as he recognized his daughter's looping script. the one she carried everywhere that summer. The final entry, dated July 12, 2003, read, "Going to the fair today. Rachel says I can have cotton candy and ride the Ferris wheel. I saw the Candyman setting up his stand when we got our photo taken. He winked at me like he knows a secret. Maybe he'll give me extra cotton candy if I find him later." Rachel closed her eyes against the surge of grief. The Candyman. The man in the blue cap. Ellie had noticed him even before the fair officially opened. Had he noticed her too? Had he already selected his victim hours before the fireworks began? As the forensic team continued processing evidence from the 3 burial sites, a pattern emerged. Each location formed points in a triangle around the area where Ellie was last seen. Each contained items that pointed directly to Tom Grayson's involvement, and each had been deliberately preserved, as though the conspirators couldn't bring themselves to destroy the evidence entirely. "It's like a confession in pieces," Sheriff Price said. "Buried where no one would find it unless they were specifically looking. Or unless the ground itself decided to give up its secrets," Rachel thought, watching as rain continued to fall on the exposed earth of the fairgrounds. 20 years of silence, and now the soil of Maple Hollow seemed determined to speak. Liam Ortega's investigation led him to Riverdale, a small town 40 miles from Maple Hollow. There, in county property records, he found a modest home purchased in 2005 by Thomas Graydon, a name that appeared nowhere in Maple Hollow's history. Property tax records, utility bills, even a local library card, Liam told Rachel over the phone, all under Thomas Graydon, but the driver's license photo is unmistakable. It's Tom Grayson. Tom Grayson had lived quietly in Riverdale for 16 years before dying of heart failure in 2021. Under his assumed identity, he had worked maintenance at a local church and volunteered at community events. Neighbors described him as quiet but friendly, always willing to help, and good with children. Rachel and Sheriff Price drove to Riverdale the following day, meeting with local authorities who seemed stunned to learn that their unassuming neighbor might have been involved in a child's disappearance. He was a regular at the summer picnic, Riverdale's Sheriff Dawson explained, showing them photographs from community events. Ran the ring toss booth every year. In the images, an older but recognizable Tom Grayson smiled at the camera, a church volunteer badge pinned to his shirt. Children crowded around his booth, reaching for prizes he held just out of reach. "How did no one recognize him?" Rachel asked. "His photo was in every post office in the county after Ellie disappeared." "Look at his employment reference," Sheriff Price said, examining Grayson's church application. "Recommended by Gerald Winters, Maple Hollow Town Council." The same Gerald Winters who now served as town council president. The same man whose security company had received mysterious payments from the Fair Committee for years after Ellie's disappearance. He helped Grayson establish his new identity, Liam concluded. Protected him, gave him references, made sure he landed somewhere close enough to monitor, but far enough to avoid recognition. DNA testing confirmed what they already suspected. The hair found on Ellie's dress matched samples taken from Grayson's personal effects in Riverdale. Additionally, soil samples from his garden shed contained the same chemical compounds found at the fairground burial sites. He kept trophies, Dr. Noakes explained, not just from Ellie's case, but potentially others. Among Grayson's possessions, investigators discovered a locked metal case containing photographs of children at various fairs and carnivals across 3 states. Some images dated back to the late 1990s, suggesting Ellie might not have been his first victim. He worked the carnival circuit, Sheriff Price said. Different names, different towns, but always the same target. Children, separated briefly from parents in crowded environments. On April 24th, forensic analysis revealed something that transformed their understanding of the case. The whistle found in the buried footlocker contained microscopic traces of blood in its mouthpiece. blood that matched Ellie Murrow's DNA from family reference samples. This suggests she was alive after her abduction, Dr. Chen explained gently to Rachel and Robert. The whistle may have been given to her as a means of false reassurance or control. Rachel couldn't bring herself to ask how long her sister might have survived after being taken. Some questions, she had learned, had answers too painful to hear. As the investigation expanded, more connections between Grayson and Maple Hollow's leadership emerged. Financial records showed that Frank Bell had co-signed a loan for Grayson's Riverdale home. Marjorie Bell's personal calendar noted regular lunch meetings with a TG at a diner halfway between Maple Hollow and Riverdale. Gerald Winters had visited Grayson's church multiple times, signing the guest book as Greg Wilson. It wasn't just covering up a crime, Rachel realized. They were protecting him, visiting him. Why? The answer came from an unexpected source. On April 29th, Karen Mills, the former ticket booth worker, requested a meeting with Sheriff Price and Rachel. "I didn't tell you everything before," she admitted, her hands twisting anxiously in her lap. "I was afraid. Still am. But seeing all this in the news, I can't stay silent anymore." In 2003, Karen explained, she had witnessed an argument between Frank Bell and Tom Grayson behind the maintenance shed. 2 days before Ellie disappeared. Frank was furious, telling Tom he had to leave town, that they couldn't cover for him anymore. Tom said something like, "You owe me. All of you owe me." Then he mentioned something about the summer of '87, and Frank went white as a sheet. "The summer of '87, Rachel repeated. "What happened then?" "I don't know specifics, but after that, Frank backed down completely, started treating Tom like he was untouchable. When I asked Marjorie about it later, she said some things were better left in the past, and that Tom had helped the town through a difficult time. Sheriff Price's investigation into Maple Hollow's history revealed that the summer of 1987 had nearly destroyed the town. A devastating flood had wiped out the business district, and the Fair Committee, then led by Gerald Winters' father, had been accused of embezzling rebuilding funds. The scandal had nearly reached criminal prosecution when suddenly all accusations were withdrawn. The town rebuilt, the fair continued, and the financial discrepancies were forgotten. Tom Grayson, 22 years old at the time, had worked as an assistant to the Fair Committee treasurer that summer. He knew something, Liam theorized, something that could have destroyed the town's leadership, so when he got into trouble, they protected him. "Even at the cost of a child's life," Rachel added bitterly. The forgiven face, the predator welcomed back despite known risks, hadn't just been an oversight. It had been a deliberate choice made by people who valued their reputations over a child's safety. Riverdale Cemetery provided the final piece of the puzzle. Grayson's burial plot, purchased by the Maple Hollow Town Council as a community service gesture, contained not just his remains but also a small metal box buried at the foot of his grave. Inside, wrapped in acid-free paper, a child's hair ribbon, yellow with tiny daisies, and a note in Grayson's handwriting. "Tell the Murrow girl I kept my promise. I preserved what they wanted forgotten. May God forgive us all." The evil that had taken Ellie Murrow hadn't come from outside Maple Hollow. It had lived among them, been protected by them, and ultimately been forgiven by them, all to preserve the illusion that their town, their beloved fair, could never harbor such darkness. Liam Ortega's documentary series, Buried Lies, The Ellie Murrow Case, premiered online in early May. The first episode detailed the discovery of the buried evidence and the emerging connections between Tom Grayson and Maple Hollow's leadership. Within hours, the video had hundreds of thousands of views. National news outlets picked up the story. Social media exploded with "Dej Shaks Justice for Ellie" hashtags and calls for accountability. For the people of Maple Hollow, The documentary shattered 2 decades of carefully maintained denial. The town divided almost immediately, some residents demanding full disclosure and accountability, others insisting that digging up old tragedies served no purpose. Anonymous notes appeared on Rachel's doorstep. Let it rest, for your sake. Some secrets protect us all. Go back to where you came from. But for every threatening message, dozens of supportive ones arrived. Former fairgoers who remembered Ellie, parents who had comforted terrified children after her disappearance, community members who had always suspected something wasn't right about the investigation. Marjorie Bell resigned from her position on the Historical Preservation Board and retreated into seclusion, her attorney issuing a statement that his client was cooperating fully with authorities while maintaining her innocence regarding any criminal wrongdoing. Town Council President Gerald Winters faced protesters at each public appearance, citizens demanding to know why he had helped relocate a suspected child abductor and provided him with employment references. On May 12th, the Fair Committee announced that the annual Maple Hollow County Fair would be canceled for the first time in its 86-year history, citing ongoing investigations and community healing. For Rachel, the public reckoning brought mixed emotions. The truth she had sought for 20 years was emerging piece by piece, but it offered little comfort. The sister she had lost would never return. The childhood stolen from her family could never be restored. What I want people to understand, she told Liam during an interview for his documentary, is that this isn't just about finding who took Ellie. It's about acknowledging how an entire community became complicit in hiding the truth, how good people convinced themselves that preserving an image was more important than justice for a child. Sheriff Price's investigation continued to uncover disturbing connections. An anonymous whistleblower provided a copy of retired Sheriff Collins' original search authorization, showing areas of the fairgrounds that were never examined, despite his requests. The document bore a handwritten note in the margin, "Search incomplete due to order from higher authority." The authority was Mayor Wilson, Collins confirmed when confronted with the document. He said a comprehensive search would destroy the fair's reputation and cost the town its primary revenue source. Former Mayor Wilson, now in his 80s and living in a nursing facility, declined to comment except through his attorney, who stated, "My client made difficult decisions based on the information available at the time and in what he believed were the best interests of the community." On May 23rd, excavation began at a section of the fairgrounds identified in Tom Grayson's personal papers as the Quiet Place. Ground-penetrating radar had detected an anomaly 6 feet below the surface, beneath what had once been the maintenance shed foundation. Rachel stood beside her father as the excavation team worked, both preparing themselves for what might be found. After 20 years of uncertainty, the possibility of finding Ellie's remains brought both dread and the desperate hope for closure. What they uncovered, however, was not human remains but another kind of evidence. A concrete chamber roughly 6 feet square, accessible only through a trapdoor that had been sealed with industrial adhesive. Inside, forensic teams found a child's blanket, rope fragments, and walls bearing scratch marks at the height a small child might reach. "A holding location," Dr. Noakes explained quietly. "Likely temporary, based on the limited supplies found inside." The concrete room's existence had never appeared in any fairground blueprints or renovation plans, yet its construction would have required significant materials and time, impossible to accomplish without multiple people's knowledge and cooperation. Most damning of all, the chamber's walls contained fingerprints matching not just Tom Grayson, but also Frank Bell and Gerald Winters. On May 30th, Gerald Winters was taken into custody, charged with conspiracy after the fact, evidence tampering, and accessory to kidnapping. Additional charges were expected as the investigation continued. That evening, Rachel stood alone on the fairgrounds, watching as the skeletal frame of the half-constructed pavilion swayed gently in the spring breeze. The Ferris wheel that had once dominated the skyline had been dismantled years ago, leaving only the concrete pad where it had stood, the last place her sister had been seen. 20 years of searching had revealed not a single villain, but an entire system of protection and denial. Not one evil act, but years of calculated concealment. Not one moment of tragedy, but decades of collective guilt. As darkness fell, Rachel placed a small solar light near where Ellie had vanished, a tiny beacon against the gathering shadows. In the morning, she would continue her fight for justice. But for now, she allowed herself to grieve for the sister who had never had the chance to grow up, for the family forever fractured by loss, and for a community that had chosen comfortable lies over unbearable truth. The fairgrounds stood silent, its bright lights extinguished, its carefully maintained facade finally cracked to reveal the darkness it had harbored all along. The preliminary hearing for Gerald Winters drew national media attention. Reporters filled the small Maple Hollow courthouse, cameras capturing the moment the former town council president entered in handcuffs, his once commanding presence diminished by orange prison attire. Prosecutor Andrea Freeman laid out the state's case methodically. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, evidence tampering, accessory after the fact. The charges stopped short of directly implicating Winters in Ellie's abduction, focusing instead on his role in the subsequent cover-up. The defendant used his influence to shield Tom Grayson from investigation, Freeman told the court. He facilitated Grayson's relocation, provided false employment references, and diverted town funds to ensure his continued silence. These weren't acts of misguided loyalty or community protection. They were calculated decisions to prevent justice for a missing child. Winters pleaded not guilty, his attorney arguing that actions taken after Ellie's disappearance were misguided attempts to protect the town's economic stability rather than efforts to conceal a crime. Judge Miranda Holcomb set bail at $2 million, citing flight risk and the severity of the charges. As Winters was led from the courtroom, his gaze met Rachel's briefly, not with defiance or remorse, but with something that looked unsettlingly like resignation. Outside the courthouse, Rachel faced a wall of microphones and cameras. "This is just the beginning," she told reporters. "One arrest doesn't erase 20 years of communal silence. This case has never been about a single perpetrator. It's about an entire system that valued preservation of image over a child's life." The case had exposed fault lines throughout Maple Hollow. Residents who had lived as neighbors for decades now viewed each other with suspicion, wondering who else might have known, who else had remained silent. The town's beloved fair, once its identity and economic engine, now symbolized collective shame. Liam's documentary series continued, each episode revealing new layers of the conspiracy. The third installment focused on the summer of '87 connection, the leverage Tom Grayson had apparently held over town leadership. Through archived records and interviews with former residents, Liam uncovered evidence that Fair Committee funds had indeed been embezzled during the post-flood rebuilding, money that found its way into private accounts belonging to several prominent families, including the Winters and Bell families. Tom Grayson, then a young bookkeeper, discovered the discrepancies, Liam explained in his narration. Rather than exposing the theft, he appears to have used this knowledge as insurance, leverage he could call in if ever he needed protection. On June 15th, forensic analysis of the concrete chamber yielded the most heartbreaking evidence yet, a small fingerprint preserved in the adhesive used to seal the trapdoor. The print matched Ellie Murrow's records from her elementary school registration. "This confirms she was held in that location," Sheriff Price told the Murrow family gently, "at least temporarily." The chamber's location, directly beneath what had been the Fair Committee's private office, suggested that multiple people must have known of its existence. The soundproofing discovered in the walls indicated forethought and planning beyond what one person could accomplish alone. We believe at least 3 individuals were actively involved, Dr. Noakes explained during a case review. Grayson as the primary perpetrator, Winters and Bell as facilitators, and potentially others who maintained the conspiracy of silence over 2 decades. What remained elusive was definitive proof of Ellie's fate. Despite extensive searches of locations connected to Grayson, Winters, and the Bell family, no human remains had been discovered. The mystery deepened when investigators found a series of payments from Gerald Winters to a crematorium in neighboring Jefferson County, facilities used exclusively for witness evidence from the missing section of Sheriff Collins' original investigation. He was systematically destroying evidence, Sheriff Price concluded, using official channels to eliminate anything that might have led to Grayson or revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. For Rachel, each new revelation was another wound reopened. The knowledge that her sister had been alive, held captive within yards of where search parties had gathered, was almost unbearable. That multiple people had known and done nothing felt like a betrayal beyond comprehension. "The hardest part isn't just losing Ellie," she confided to Liam during a quiet moment between filming. "It's knowing that people I grew up with, people who hugged me and told me they were praying for her return, might have known where she was all along. How do you reconcile that? How do you ever trust anyone again?" On June 28th, an unexpected witness came forward. Maria Fernandez, who had worked as a housekeeper for the Bell family in 2003, contacted Sheriff Price with information she had carried for 20 years. "I found bloodied children's clothing in their trash," she revealed through a translator, "the night after the little girl went missing. Mrs. Bell told me it was from her granddaughter's nosebleed, but there was too much blood. And there was a yellow ribbon, like the missing girl wore in her hair." Maria had kept the ribbon hidden in her family Bible for 2 decades, too afraid of deportation to come forward earlier. Forensic testing confirmed the ribbon contained Ellie's DNA. The evidence against Marjorie Bell mounted. Bank records showed she had withdrawn large sums from her personal account in the months following Ellie's disappearance, cash that aligned with payments made to the facility where Tom Grayson eventually lived in Riverdale. On the last day of June, Sheriff Price arrived at the Murrow home with news that brought both closure and renewed grief. "We found documentation in Winter's personal safe," he explained, his voice gentle but steady. "Records of a cremation ordered on July 15, 2003, 3 days after Ellie disappeared. The paperwork was falsified to indicate disposal of biological waste materials from the high school science department." Rachel closed her eyes, her father's hand finding hers across the kitchen table. The truth they had both suspected but couldn't bear to acknowledge now lay before them in official language, sterile and devastating. "Winters signed the authorization," Sheriff Price continued, "but the witness signature belongs to Marjorie Bell." They had found Ellie at last, not as they had hoped, but in the documented evidence of her final disposition. The conspirators had erased her physical presence, but preserved emblems of her existence: the dress, the ribbon, the photograph, as though compelled by guilt to maintain some proof that she had lived, had mattered. "Why keep anything?" Robert Murrow asked, his voice cracking. "Why not destroy it all?" "Conscience," Sheriff Price suggested, "even in the worst. Betrayal. Some part of them couldn't completely erase her." Or perhaps, Rachel thought, they kept these items as insurance against each other, proof that could incriminate co-conspirators if anyone ever threatened to speak out. The same compartmentalized thinking that had allowed them to participate in covering up a child's disappearance while maintaining their public roles as community leaders. The fairgrounds stood empty now, the planned reconstruction abandoned indefinitely. Yellow police tape surrounded the areas where evidence had been unearthed, fluttering in the summer breeze like grim pennants. 20 years of searching had brought answers, though not the ones they had prayed for. Not the miracle of Ellie found alive, but the cold confirmation of what they had feared from the beginning, that evil had taken root in the very heart of Maple Hollow, nurtured by silence and watered with denial. On the anniversary of Ellie's disappearance, Rachel Murrow stood before a gathering at the edge of what had once been the Maple Hollow Fairgrounds. Behind her, construction crews were not rebuilding carnival structures, but creating a memorial garden, a place of reflection to replace what had become a symbol of collective guilt. 20 years ago today, my sister disappeared from this spot, Rachel began, her voice steady despite the emotion visible on her face. For 2 decades, we searched for answers, while an entire community maintained a wall of silence. That wall has finally crumbled. The crowd, hundreds strong, included not just Maple Hollow residents but families from across the country who had experienced similar losses. The national attention brought by Liam's documentary had transformed Ellie's case from a local tragedy into a symbol of institutional failure and the devastating cost of communal denial. What happened to Ellie wasn't just the act of one predator, Rachel continued. It was enabled by a system that valued reputation over protection, comfort over truth. When we say it takes a village to raise a child, we must also acknowledge that it takes a village to fail one. In the front row, Robert Murrow sat beside Sheriff Price and Liam Ortega. Behind them, former Sheriff Collins listened with tears, tracking down his weathered face, his late-life testimony having helped bring the conspiracy to light. The previous month had seen justice advancing in measured steps. Marjorie Bell had been arrested and charged as an accessory to kidnapping and murder, her advanced age not shielding her from accountability. 3 former town officials faced charges related to evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. Gerald Winters had accepted a plea agreement, providing detailed testimony about the conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence. His statement described how Tom Grayson had approached Frank Bell after abducting Ellie, seeking help when things went wrong. Bell, fearing exposure of both the current crime and past financial misconduct, had enlisted Winters' help in concealing evidence and creating an escape path for Grayson. The plea deal revealed the full timeline. Ellie had been taken during the fireworks display, held briefly in the concrete chamber beneath the fair office, and died that same night. Whether by accident or intent remained unclear in Winters' testimony. What was clear was the calculated response that followed. Rather than reporting the tragedy, the conspirators had arranged for cremation through channels controlled by Winters. They had buried evidence in locations they controlled, preserved items that might serve as leverage against each other, and systematically removed any clues from the official investigation. "We thought we were protecting the town," Winters had stated in his recorded confession. The fair was everything to Maple Hollow, its identity, its economy. One child against an entire community's future. We made a choice I've regretted every day since. As Rachel concluded her remarks at the memorial gathering, she unveiled the centerpiece of the new garden, a bronze statue of a little girl releasing a butterfly, Ellie's name inscribed on the base alongside the words, "Truth cannot stay buried." "My sister's legacy isn't just a tragic cautionary tale," Rachel said. "It's a call to vigilance, to notice what others try to hide, to speak when others demand silence, to remember that safety isn't created by denying danger, but by confronting it directly." The memorial garden included educational displays about warning signs of predatory behavior, the psychology of institutional cover-ups, and resources for families of missing children. What had been a fairground of illusion was transforming into a place of education and remembrance. Liam's documentary series concluded with this memorial dedication. its final episode focusing not on the conspiracy itself, but on the broader implications for communities across America. The warning signs that had been ignored in Maple Hollow existed in thousands of towns. Trusted individuals given access to children without proper vetting, financial incentives to maintain appearances at all costs, and leadership structures that valued stability over accountability. Ellie Murrow's disappearance became more than a mystery, Liam's narration concluded over footage of the memorial garden. It became a mirror. In the reflection, Maple Hollow saw what it had tried to hide. That denial is the quietest accomplice of all. After the ceremony, Rachel walked alone through what had once been the carnival midway. Where the Ferris wheel had stood, native wildflowers now grew, yellow black-eyed Susans, and field daisies, like the ones Ellie had worn in her hair that final day. The fair would never return to Maple Hollow. The town council had voted unanimously to permanently retire the tradition, acknowledging that it could never again represent innocent community celebration. Instead, the land was being transformed into the Ellie Murrow Center for Child Safety, a facility dedicated to education, advocacy, and support for families of missing children. The center would house Rachel's expanded work with the Families of Missing Persons Network, bringing resources to those facing the same devastating uncertainty her family had endured for 20 years. As twilight fell, Rachel placed a small solar light near the butterfly statue, a beacon against the gathering darkness. Other attendees followed suit until hundreds of tiny lights illuminated the garden, each representing a child lost, a truth hidden, a silence finally broken. The next day, Rachel would meet with prosecutors preparing for Marjorie Bell's trial. She would review Liam's footage for a national news special. She would continue the work of accountability and prevention that had become her life's purpose. But for now, in this moment between day and night, she allowed herself to remember not the case, not the conspiracy, but simply her sister. 8 years old, gap-toothed smile, freckles across her nose, yellow sundress catching the carnival lights as she pointed excitedly toward the Ferris wheel. "We found the truth, Ellie," she whispered to the empty air. "It didn't bring you back, but it made sure you were never forgotten." Behind her, the memorial garden stood as testament to what happens when a community finally faces what it has buried, not just evidence of a crime, but its own complicity in allowing darkness to flourish in familiar places. The lights of Maple Hollow glimmered in the distance, a town forever changed by what had been unearthed. Not just a child's fate, but the terrible cost of collective denial. Not just a single evil act, but the quiet conspiracy that had protected it. Not just one family's tragedy, but an entire community's reckoning with the truth it had tried so desperately to keep underground. "Some truths don't belong above ground," Marjorie Bell had said. But as the memorial lights brightened against the deepening night, one truth became undeniable. What we bury never truly disappears. It waits, patient and preserving, until someone finds the courage to dig. If you've ever ignored that feeling, that flash of wrongness that raises the hair on your neck, remember Maple Hollow. Stories like Ellie's don't just unravel in small towns. They happen anywhere people decide some truths are too inconvenient to see. The 5 warning signs were there all along. The mirage of safety, how comfort replaced caution, the vanishing vendor, how a predator hid in plain sight, the town's silence pact, how reputation outweighed truth, the echoes in the soil, how time preserves what we try to forget, the forgiven face, how we convince ourselves that evil couldn't exist among us. Perhaps in your community, similar signs wait to be recognized. Perhaps somewhere a truth lies just beneath the surface, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it, because the most dangerous predators aren't strangers, lurking in shadows. They're the faces we've chosen to trust, the ones we forgive too easily, the ones protected by our collective need to believe that our homes, our traditions, our communities could never harbor such darkness. But as Maple Hollow learned too late, unanswered, what we choose not to see doesn't disappear. It only waits for the ground to give up its secrets.